The Zf Cdc is a dual-tube shock absorber. It is composed by the following parts: the body in black, the rod, it is closed by bending, now it has been remanufactured. Inside there is a common guide with the sealing system, an inner cylinder. Here there is the rod inside with a standard piston. As you can see, the inner cylinder has one hole, a secondary cylinder that starts over the hole and finish little bit before the bottom valve. Into this, then, we have also a solenoid placed here, moving up and down a valve that is opening and closing this system. How the shock absorber works? First of all, we have oil here, 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 all above the piston and under the piston. Then we have oil also into the chamber between the inner and the secondary cylinder. And then we have also oil during half cylinder or 2/3. Then over the oil we have gas, nitrogen. How does it work? When we push the rod in, we create a pressure between the piston and the bottom valve and a vacuum between the piston and the guide. Because this difference of pressure, the oil crosses the piston, part of the oil. The other part of the oil crosses the bottom valve. In rebound, when we pull out the rod, we create a pressure between the piston and the guide, and a vacuum between the piston and the bottom valve. Because this difference of pressure, an amount of oil crosses the piston. The amount of oil is equivalent to the cylinder less the volume of the rod. Because this amount of oil is not enough to fill this volume, an amount of oil equivalent to the volume of the rod crosses the bottom valve. In this way, the inner cylinder remains always full of oil. Now, when we pull the rod out, the oil tries to pass through this hose, through this hole, goes into the chamber, and from the chamber comes to the valve. If the valve is closed, the oil cannot make this. So all the oil is obliged to pass through this piston. This piston is very hard. So if the valve is closed, all the oil is passing through the piston that is very hard, and the shock absorber will be very hard. If the valve starts to be opening, a part of oil can pass through this valve, and through this valve goes to the chamber between the second cylinder and the body. In this way, we reduce the amount of oil crossing the piston, and we reduce the damping force of the shock absorber. So more is the tension we apply to the valve, and lower will be the damping force of the shock absorber. This valve affects rebound and compression. Fix the Zf Cdc on the milling machine using a proper vise. The EMETEC 99050 is warmly suggested. Remove the cover of the solenoid and the solenoid itself. The kit of specific tools 98587 is mandatory to reman a Zf Cdc shock absorber removing the lateral valve. Align the side valve with the mandrel of the milling machine using the tool Emetec 98587C. Using the tool 98587C, align the mandrel of the milling machine with the electronic valve. Then, using the tool 98587D, align the milling cutter 587A with the electronic valve. Once the milling cutter and its holder are aligned with the side valve and guided by the centering device, it is possible to proceed. Fix the tool 98587A and B to the mandrel of the milling machine and regulate its speed at 50 revolutions per minute. Keep the milling cutter lubricated and mill the original housing of the electronic valve. Remove the tool and control the job. Remove the edge of the housing of the side valve until the distance between the edge of the housing and the valve is 1.5 and 1.6 mm. Sand around the housing of the side valve, removing the chips. With a screwdriver or a scalpel, remove the electronic valve. If the side valve is blocked in, remove it with the specific kit 99971F. Simply fix the tool 99971F around the electronic valve. Tie the two parts and pull out the valve. Dismount the valve respecting the order and position of each component. Finally, remove the oil from the side valve seat. To protect it from dirt, close it with paper. Open the shock absorber on the Mangusta or on the lathe machine using the specific tool 99970 Zeta. Remove the rod, the piston, the guide, and the rebound stop. With a homemade tool and a nylon punch, remove the bottom valve from the inner cylinder. Fix the body of the shock absorber on the mandrel of the lathe machine, center it with the lathe bezel, and make the thread using the threading tool or the thread tap. Use the specific kit Emetec 98589 to shorten the inner cylinder. Use the plug D02022 to protect the side hole. Catch the inner cylinder with the tool 98589A, B, G, or H. Reduce its length according to the cutting point of the body. If needed, dismount, clean, and mount again the piston, respecting always the order and position of each component. If any oil gap in rebound, especially if any dirt into the bottom valve, dismount and clean it. Then remount it using the kit 21120. If you feel that the rebound diagram is too much per load and pulling up the rod the oil do not rise, try removing the second diaphragm. These are the bolt and the nut of the kit. Replace the shims and the calibrator. If needed, you can increase the compression force, replacing the calibrator of the bottom valve with a new one having a smaller bypass area, or even moving the original one on the top of the shim stack. In this way, it will work like if any calibrator, and compression will be very hard at very low speeds. Be careful centering the diaphragm and positioning the spring. Double check if the diaphragm is properly centered, and if not, move it within heard a metallic noise. Then tie by hand without forcing, and finally with tools. Double check again in order to be sure. Fix the bottom valve to the inner cylinder. If need, replace the bushing and the scraper ring into the guide, or at least press it in order to increase its preload. Fit the piston and the rod into the inner cylinder, and the inner cylinder into the body. Replace the O-rings of the lateral valve with the listed ones. Replace the components of the valve, adding grease around the O-ring. Put the grease around each O-ring in order to avoid it to get cut when fixed. Once the valve is fixed in, remove the tool 99971F. The specific kit 50461 is mandatory to fix the side valve again. Pass the circlip and the manifold around the housing of the valve, and then fit the circlip into the manifold. Then block the manifold on the housing of the electronic valve using a thread ring. Tighten the thread ring 02297 of the kit 50461 using the specific tool 98588. It will be simpler, and you will avoid to damage the thread ring. Place the solenoid. If in good conditions, the original solenoid can be used again, otherwise must be replaced with the 52007 offered by Emetec. And then fix also the cover of the solenoid. Emetec suggests to remount the Zf Cdce front and rear shock absorber of Audi Q7 4L First Series, Porsche Cayenne 9PA First Series, Volkswagen Touareg 7L First Series using the kit 50463 because easier to use. Remove the components of the kit from the back . Place them as per the datasheet. Fix the rest of the parts of the rod and rebound stop. Place into the guide. Fit into the shock absorber. Fit the oil. Bleed it. Control that it works properly with any oil gap in rebound. Install the O-ring. Fix it all around the border and the centering ring downwards in order to create a housing and protect the O-ring. Screw the thread ring by hand and with a level. Tie check by hand and pressurize for 5 bars.